Okay, everyone. So in today's solo episode, I am going to talk about a topic that know might hit a few buttons for a few people, but I feel like it's a pretty important one. And those of you that have been listening to this Autoimmune Rehab podcast for quite a while know that in some of the solo episodes, I've talked about some different aspects of diet and how that helps, or in some cases, even harms your journey to healing from an autoimmune condition. And a lot of my guests have mentioned it to various degrees or another. But what I'm going to talk about is the hidden dangers of popular diets for autoimmune conditions and autoimmune healing. Now, what do I mean by that? Basically, I'm going to talk about some of the more popular diets, if you will, out there, and some of the hidden dangers and problems that can exist by following some of these diets if you have an autoimmune condition specifically. Now, obviously, these are more, generic advice. It's based on my own experience, the experiences of other people that I know, as well as some of the guests that I've interviewed. And it's also based on just some of my own research, as well as just some of the information that is out there from a lot of functional health doctors and things like that. So, if you are following one of these diets and have found it to be helpful for you, that's fine. Don't stop. This is just merely meant to be more educational for people out there who are starting their healing journey or are in a situation where they are trying to decide what kind of diet is right for them as part of their healing from an autoimmune condition. And just to help point out some of the challenges and things that may come across if you try one of these more popular diets and you have an autoimmune condition specifically. So the first one that I'm going to talk about, and I realize this one might hit some, how do you call it? Some buttons or, might trigger some people, is plant-based or veganism. And I'm going to come right out and just say that going fully plant-based and veganism is not healthy if you have an autoimmune condition. And some of you might be triggered by that a little bit. Some of you probably already know that. But there is actually lots and lots of research on it and that says, more specifically, that if you have an autoimmune condition, there are certain things like the higher volume of B12 that you really can't get through just supplementation, as well as the collagen from things like chicken and fish and things like that you really need to be consuming if you have an autoimmune condition. So going full out vegan or plant-based when you have autoimmune disorder is actually really a terrible idea. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that really advocate for this as a lifestyle. And, there are some people that it works for. But if you have an autoimmune condition, I really strongly encourage you to rethink whether or not going full out vegan or plant-based is a good idea. Now, that said, a lot of us do have sensitivities or allergies around dairy and eggs and things like that. Personally, I don't have an issue with eggs, thank goodness, but I do have an issue with like cheese and yogurt and, some of those heavier dairy products and things like that. So I do actually have to avoid that aspect of it. And I don't eat red like beef and things because I just don't like them. And I think that you need to be a little bit careful with some things like bacon and ham because they are known to have a higher concentration of parasites. And parasites can, of course, be, in some cases, even one of the root causes of some autoimmune conditions. So, you need to think about that. But just know that going full out vegan, not consuming, at least bone broth or at least some chicken or fish is really going to be a bad idea if you have an autoimmune condition. And part of that is just because we need those extra minerals and vitamins and things that we can only get from meat and products and things like that. And then I think the other aspect of this that goes into this is that a lot of vegan and plant-based diets involve high amounts of soy and or grains and things, which really are also not good if you have an autoimmune condition. So, I will probably find and see if I can link to some specific resources about this, but just know that if you are considering veganism or plant-based, or if you have already tried it and you feel like you're just not getting better, there's a reason why, and that's that this kind of diet is really not good or healthy for people with autoimmune conditions. And there's actually, I've even heard some doctors and functional health coaches and things even talk about how it's actually the worst diet, even for a lot of people and not just people with autoimmune conditions. So I realize, like I said, this might trigger some things, and there are some people that will disagree with me, but I just had to point that out because that's been my own experience as well as what I have heard and researched. Okay, then a second diet that you want to be a little bit careful of is the AIP or autoimmune paleo diet. And I did a separate episode back when I first started this podcast about this diet specifically. And there is nothing inherently wrong with this one, unlike the vegan or plant-based. It actually can be really good to get started with and to trigger that healing and to help you identify what kinds of food sensitivities and things you might have. I actually have some guests that have followed it pretty stringently and had really good success. Like when I interviewed, forget his first name now, but he had Crohn's disease that he put into remission and then started his own spice company. He had he followed AIP really strictly. And to this day, there are a few things that are non-AIP that he eats, but he still follows it to a large degree because he felt like that really helped put his Crohn's disease into remission. So it's not necessarily that AIP can't work or that you shouldn't try it. But the biggest thing I've seen with something like AIP is that it's so restrictive that for a lot of people, they can almost develop into like an eating disorder kind thing. And it can be very, very hard and very, very expensive for a lot of people to follow. So it's something you really want to think of twice before you try it. And if you do try it, know that it really should be a temporary thing and that you should be focusing on trying to identify the other aspects of your health and your healing and trying to ask yourself, how can you get to the point where, say, you can have things like some fruits or maybe a small amount of rice or things like that and not, feel like you're just so limited that it becomes a really big problem. And there are some things out there, like Nayed is a popular treatment that a lot of acupuncturists or even holistic doctors will do that can help you overcome some of your allergies and food sensitivities. And also by working on healing your gut over time, you should be able to get to the point that you can eat a lot more foods. So AIP, again, like I said, is one of those things that I'm not necessarily against it for the short term. And for people that have really severe issues, I believe that that can help. But being on AIP over the long haul, I feel like is just really too restrictive. I feel like a lot of us are better off sticking with just the regular paleo diet. I'm one of those people who's about a 90% paleo, and what I mean by that is that I do occasionally eat some rice or things, that are not totally paleo. But, 90% of the time I follow more or less paleo, and I feel like that works really well for me. And I feel like that works really well for a lot of other people with autoimmune conditions as well. So those are really the two main ones that I feel like are, have these hidden dangers of these kind of popular diets. And along with that, I guess a third one I would add would be to avoid any kind of a fad diet, if you will, or any kind of a diet that is having you only eat 2 or 3 foods or, having you do just kind of some of these weird stuff, to stay away from a lot of that kind of stuff. And, eat the rainbow, try to eat a variety of foods, eat whole foods, eat foods that are unprocessed, avoid gluten and sugar, and in most cases dairy. And a lot of us will need to also avoid corn and soy. But you get the point. Just kind of, try to be as healthy as possible and eat as many a variety of whole real foods as possible. I like to advocate for what we call single ingredient food. So that basically means there's only one ingredient in the food. And, with the exception of some cases, for example, like I like to get the Trader Joe's frozen turkey burgers, and the ingredients literally are turkey, rosemary, and salt. So, rosemary and salt are technically 2 different ingredients, but it's still basically a single ingredient food because it's basically the turkey with just a little bit of seasoning. But, different things like that. Canned tuna would be another example of something where I believe it has, they might have some seasoning, things in it. But the main real principal ingredient is tuna, and it's still considered basically a whole food. So, and, then of course you can make a lot of meals that will have multiple ingredients because you're combining a lot of single ingredient foods into one food. So that's basically the gist of it. And I know this is going to be somewhat of a short episode, but just wanted to share some of this because I know that diet definitely plays a role in autoimmune healing. It is not the only thing. And obviously, if you've listened to a lot of my interviews, you'll know that a lot of people have gone through their journeys with diet being an important thing, but it isn't the sole thing that helped them heal and overcome some of their autoimmune challenges. So take care, and I will catch you soon on another episode.